There was a forest where people didn't often go alone. A place wrapped in quiet so thick, it felt like the trees themselves held their breath. Mark, an experienced hiker who liked to explore places others avoided, decided to spend a day in this pine forest. It was known by the locals as a spot where people had vanished without explanation, their trails ending in empty silence. But Mark didn't believe in those stories. He trusted his own judgment, and the forest was beautiful. Tall, crowded pines that stretched up to the sky, their needles catching the light like green flames in the afternoon sun. The air was cool, the kind of crispness that pulls deeper with every breath. Around him, the forest pressed in with thick trunks and tangled underbrush. The usual sounds you expect in the woods, birds, squirrels, the rustle of small animals, were muted here. The world felt smaller, the sounds swallowed up by the towering trees. Mark stepped carefully, each footfall soft against the mossy floor, and the only clear noise was his own breathing. But then something changed. Just as the sun began to slip lower, a faint sound slipped through the stillness. A whisper, almost like a voice, carried on the breeze. It was so soft it was easy to doubt, almost as if his mind was playing tricks. But the whispers weren't words he could make out. They sounded like murmurs, human but distant, as if someone was calling from just beyond sight. Mark paused, scanning the shadowed spaces between the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, no sign that anyone else was there. The forest seemed to grow colder, the air heavier. The quiet stretched beyond normal limits, folding around him. Even the shadows seemed to lean closer. For a moment, Mark felt as if the trees themselves were listening, watching. Alone in the middle of the pines, with only the faint whispering carried by the wind, a slow, creeping unease began to settle over him. This was no ordinary hike. Something unseen had stepped into the silence, waiting for him to notice. Mark tried to shake off the feeling as he moved deeper into the forest. The whispers had stopped, or maybe he just couldn't hear them over the pounding of his own heart. Still, the quiet was different now, thicker, heavier. Each step seemed to carry him further from the world he knew and closer to something that didn't want to be found. The trees pressed in tighter, their trunks dark and smooth like ancient pillars. Moss clung to every surface, and the only light came from the fading sky above, dimming fast. Then, Mark noticed the trees themselves changing. Scattered among the pines were dozens of strange markings, carved deep into the bark. They weren't the usual initials or crude symbols left by careless visitors. These were precise, almost like letters or signs, some curved and twisted, others sharp and jagged. They looked old, older than anything Mark could place, but there was no doubt someone had been here before, and they'd left warnings. He ran his fingers over one carving and felt a strange chill creep through his skin. At that moment, a sudden sound shattered the stillness, a snap, like a branch breaking close by. Mark whipped his head around, eyes searching the shadows, but there was nothing. No movement, no shape. Just the empty forest, holding its breath again. He stepped forward, trying to convince himself it was just an animal or a falling branch. But then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, matching his pace, but only when he moved. Whenever he stopped, they stopped too. His heartbeat raced as the whispers returned. This time louder, sharper, almost like words, but still impossible to understand. Mark spun around again, but the forest was empty, except for the ever-thickening darkness beneath the pines. His compass needle spun wildly, and his phone flickered, losing signal for the first time. The forest had closed in, swallowing technology and light alike. He was alone, deeper than he intended, with something unseen following him, watching, waiting. Mark's breath came in shallow gasps as he pushed deeper into the forest, every nerve screaming at him to turn back. But something kept pulling him forward, like the forest itself had a hold on him now. The strange carvings on the trees grew more frequent, more frantic, and the air around him seemed colder, heavier, as if the woods were pressing in tighter. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing. In the center lay an old campsite, broken tents, rusted cans, and weathered belongings scattered across the ground. It looked abandoned for years, but something about it made Mark's skin crawl. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a chill swept through the air, and the whispering returned. But this time, the voice was clearer, sharper, almost urgent. "Leave now." It breathed, soft but cold enough to freeze his blood. Mark froze, eyes darting to the shadows at the clearing's edge. Shapes flickered just beyond his vision, glimpses of something watching him from the dark. The trees seemed to sway unnaturally, bending toward him like fingers reaching out. He turned to run, but the forest shifted. The path he'd come from had vanished, swallowed by shadows and trees that hadn't been there moments before. Panic set in as he heard a low, guttural rumble deep in the woods. A sound not like any animal, more like a warning growl that shook the ground beneath his feet. Branches whipped at his face and arms, slowing him down, but he pushed forward blindly, desperate to escape. Everywhere he looked, dark shapes seemed to flicker, watching, waiting. The whispers turned to harsh voices now, layered and overlapping, repeating his name and the warning. Leave. Mark's heart pounded louder than ever as the cold air wrapped around him like a shroud. The forest wasn't just alive, it was hunting him. When the first light of dawn finally spilled through the trees, Mark stumbled out of the forest like a man who had been somewhere he never wanted to return. His clothes were torn, his skin scraped raw from branches and thorns, but most unsettling was the way his eyes darted nervously, still searching the shadows behind him. He didn't speak much when he found help, only repeating one word over and over: leave. In the safety of a nearby town, Mark learned what locals whispered quietly among themselves, but never openly discussed. The forest, they said, had once been the home of a tribe that disappeared centuries ago, their fate a mystery wrapped in the coldest silence. What remained were warnings carved into the trees. Marks meant to keep people away, to protect a secret older than memory. Mark's recordings from his hike told their own story. When played back, the faint whispers could be heard clearly, a voice or many voices calling out warnings, but then something else appeared. A voice speaking his name, calling him back, and beneath it all, a sound like footsteps following close behind, even when the forest seemed empty. Even now, long after he left the woods, Mark feels the forest watching. Some nights, when the wind is right, he can still hear the whisper carried on the breeze. A warning not meant for him, but for anyone who dares to walk alone beneath the pines. Because whatever waits there does not forget, and it never lets go. There's a place deep in the forest where time seems to stand still. A lone cabin nestled far from any road or town, forgotten by most. Anna, a writer seeking quiet, rented this cabin for a week, hoping the solitude would stir her creativity. She arrived just as the sun was slipping behind the trees, the air cool and thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. The cabin looked as if no one had touched it for years. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under her feet, each step echoing in the stillness. Dust hung in the air, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the walls. Outside, the dense forest pressed close, its shadows long and silent. Windows framed patches of deep green, but there was no sign of movement, only the occasional slow drift of leaves settling on the porch. As evening fell, Anna set her things down, feeling a calm she hadn't known in a long time. But as night deepened, that calm began to fray. She thought she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, just outside the cabin. They circled the building, never quite close enough to see clearly, and vanished whenever she tried to look through the windows. No matter how often she peered out, the forest remained still, empty, as if holding its breath. The silence stretched too long, thick and unnatural. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your ears and twists your thoughts. Anna tried to convince herself it was her imagination, or perhaps a wandering animal. But something about those footsteps unsettled her. The way they moved with purpose, as if someone was tracing her every move without ever stepping inside. That night, alone in the cabin, the forest stillness felt less like peace and more like waiting for something to come. As the days passed, Anna began to notice things that didn't quite fit the quiet solitude she'd expected. While unpacking in a dusty corner of the cabin, she found an old, yellowed box tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, brittle and curling at the edges. Headlines told of people who had disappeared without a trace in the forest. Hikers, campers, even locals who had ventured too far and never returned. Their stories were brief, filled with questions but no answers. Each article ended the same way, a search that yielded nothing but silence. That night, the unsettling feeling she'd been pushing aside came rushing back. Just past midnight, a series of knocks echoed against the cabin door, slow, deliberate. Anna's heart hammered in her chest as she called out, asking who was there, but only silence answered. The forest outside remained still, the darkness impenetrable, except for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. Then the lights flickered. One moment the cabin was bathed in soft golden warmth, the next, plunged into uneasy shadow. In those brief flickers, Anna caught glimpses of something beyond the tree-line, a figure standing just out of reach. It wasn't clear, only a shape blurred by branches, but it was unmistakably there watching. Every time she blinked or looked directly, it vanished, as if refusing to be seen. Panic took hold when she tried to leave. Her car, parked a short walk from the cabin, refused to start. The engine turned over, but failed to catch. Her phone, fully charged just hours before, suddenly died, the screen going black in her trembling hands. No signal, no power, no way out. The forest seemed to close in around her, trapping her in that cabin, with the quiet outside now thick with something waiting, something patient. As the night deepened, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a trap. The temperature dropped suddenly, a biting chill that seeped through the walls and settled into Anna's bones. The flickering of the lights grew more frequent, shadows twisting and dancing across the ceiling. She tried to stay calm, clutching a flashlight, but even its beam seemed swallowed by the darkness beyond the windows. Then, soft crying echoed through the cabin. It was faint at first, almost like the wind, but unmistakably human. The sound drifted from the basement, a low sobbing that tugged at Anna's mind and made her skin crawl. She hesitated, heart pounding, every instinct begging her to run. But something compelled her forward. She found the basement door hidden behind a threadbare curtain, its wood swollen and damp. With trembling hands, she pushed it open. The stairs creaked under her weight, descending into a cold, heavy darkness. Her flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the stone walls. As she reached the bottom, the crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Then, out of that silence, shapes emerged. Shadows that clung to the corners, shifting just beyond the flashlight's reach. Fleeting faces pressed into the walls, mouths open in silent screams. Whispers filled the air, a jumble of names, dates, and warnings that churned like a gathering storm. Anna's breath hitched as a cold breeze brushed past her neck, a breath that wasn't hers. She turned to flee, but the basement seemed endless, the steps leading nowhere, stretching into a labyrinth of cold stone and dark corners. The door she'd come through was gone. In that suffocating darkness, she realized she was no longer alone. Something had been waiting, inside the cabin, beneath the earth, watching for her arrival. When dawn finally crept through the cracked windows, Anna was gone. The cabin sat silent and still, as if nothing had disturbed its long slumber. But outside, near the porch, her belongings were scattered, her journal open, pages fluttering in the cold morning breeze, as if torn from her grasp. The air smelled damp and heavy, carrying the faintest trace of something metallic, like rust or old blood. Locals who came to search found no sign of her. The forest swallowed every trace, the path back lost beneath tangled roots and fallen leaves. Even the police seemed hesitant to investigate, murmuring about old legends, about people who vanished into the woods and never returned, their stories ending where the trees grow darkest. Weeks later, a message arrived on Anna's old phone, left by someone who had no right to use it. It was a recording, static, broken words, and then a faint, chilling sound, the soft, desperate crying she had heard in the basement. And beneath it, almost too low to hear, a whisper, a name she never told anyone. The cabin remains, standing empty among the trees. Some say it waits for the next visitor, the next lost soul seeking silence and escape. And when the night is right, if you listen closely, you might still hear footsteps circling, faint knocks on the door, and the soft sound of crying carried on the wind. The forest keeps its secrets well, but it never forgets. Jason had spent years in the wild, trails, mountains, forests, and nothing had ever caught him off guard. But this time, he was heading into a part of the woods most people avoided. An unmarked trail deep inside a dense forest, whispered about in local tales not as a place to explore, but as a place where people vanished. Experienced hikers went in, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, and then simply disappeared, leaving only silence behind. The trail itself was narrow, barely more than a faint path carved by years of neglect and nature reclaiming its hold. Branches reached out like skeletal fingers, brushing against Jason's jacket as he pressed forward. The forest around him was strangely quiet. Not the usual symphony of birds, insects, or rustling leaves, just the crunch of his boots against the damp earth, and nothing else. The silence felt thick, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. As he moved deeper, Jason's eyes caught broken branches snapped off low to the ground, signs someone or something had passed this way recently. Nearby, half buried beneath fallen leaves, he spotted abandoned gear, a tattered backpack, a cracked water bottle, bits of clothing frayed at the edges. But there were no footprints, no signs of recent human presence. Just these remnants, scattered like echoes of people who once passed here but never returned. The further he went, the more the trail seemed to twist and fold back on itself. Familiar landmarks appeared again and again, as if the forest was a maze designed to trap those who dared enter. And the silence remained, so complete it was almost deafening, broken only by the steady, solitary rhythm of his own footsteps. As Jason pressed further along the unmarked path, the forest seemed to close in tighter around him. The trees grew thicker, their twisted branches forming walls that blocked the fading light, turning the day into an early dusk. The familiar landmarks he thought he recognized began to repeat with eerie consistency. The same crooked tree stump, the same cluster of moss-covered rocks, as if the forest had folded back on itself, looping endlessly. His GPS, which should have been guiding him, now spun wildly, useless against whatever strange forces seemed to grip this place. The silence was absolute, broken only by Jason's boots crunching through layers of fallen leaves and broken twigs. But beneath the quiet, there was something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound that flickered in and out of hearing. Animal calls, or so it seemed at first, but no bird or creature he'd ever known. Low, guttural noises, distant and unfamiliar, echoed through the undergrowth. Occasionally, a faint whisper drifted through the trees, indecipherable yet charged with an unsettling urgency. Jason's unease deepened as shadows lengthened and stretched in unnatural ways. Suddenly, a sharp crack to his right sent him spinning. He caught sight of movement, fleeting and shadowed, slipping between the trees, just beyond the edge of his vision. He called out, voice cracking with tension, but the forest swallowed his words, answering only with silence. As dusk settled into night, Jason realized his watch had stopped, frozen at the same time, no matter how often he checked. His phone lost all signal, plunging him into isolation deeper than he had ever known. When he tried to retrace his steps, the path vanished, swallowed by dense underbrush that had not been there moments before. The forest had shifted, and Jason was trapped inside a maze with no clear way out. After what felt like hours lost in the twisting, silent forest, Jason's eyes caught something unusual, an old stone marker, half buried in moss and dirt. The stone was cracked and weathered, but the surface was covered with strange etchings, symbols carved deep into the rock as if by hands desperate to leave a message. The marks were unfamiliar, a language lost to time, jagged and curling like claws. A cold weight settled over Jason's chest as he reached out to touch the stone, his fingers trembling. No sooner had he brushed the surface than the forest seemed to shift. The ground beneath him trembled, and without warning, unseen forces shoved him hard from behind. He stumbled forward, tripping over roots and fallen leaves, and fell into a small clearing bathed in a cold, gray light. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. The clearing was unlike anything Jason had seen. Towering, twisted tree roots stretched out like gnarled fingers, but as he stared, they seemed to twist and bend into shapes. Faces frozen in silent agony, mouths open in screams that echoed without sound. Their eyes appeared hollow, empty sockets filled with shadow. A deep, oppressive feeling weighed down on him, as if the roots themselves were watching, judging. Suddenly, his breathing quickened, ragged and panicked. From the dark edges of the clearing came low, guttural growls, animalistic but unearthly, growing louder, closing in. Jason's heart pounded like a drum as fear took hold. The forest was no longer just a place. It had become a trap, alive and aware. Without thinking, he spun and ran, stumbling blindly through the dense undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. Every step was disorienting, the forest shifting with each desperate dash. Behind him, the growls pursued, relentless and close. The trees seemed to close ranks, the darkness thickening into a suffocating wall. Jason ran, chased not just by what was there, but by the forest itself, a living nightmare that would not let him go. When Jason finally burst through the last cluster of trees, he found himself at the edge of the forest, but something was wrong. The trail behind him was gone, swallowed by the forest as if it had never existed. His breath came in ragged gasps, heart still hammering, but relief was short-lived. His watch remained frozen on the same time, its hands unmoving no matter how many times he reset it. His phone lay cracked and dead, refusing any sign of life. Days later, locals told him that the trail he tried to follow wasn't marked on any map. Many had come here before, hikers and adventurers who never returned. Some believed the forest was cursed, a place that didn't want outsiders and shifted to keep its secrets safe. They spoke of shadows moving between the trees, of strange symbols carved into stones, warnings left by those who vanished long ago. But the most haunting detail was the faces in the roots, not just shapes made by nature, but something else entirely. Some say those faces are the lost souls, frozen in eternal torment, trapped by whatever force haunts the forest. Jason's footage, recovered from his broken camera, showed fleeting glimpses of dark shapes just beyond the frame, and sounds that no human could make, growls and whispers mingled with the wind. Even now, Jason feels the forest watching from afar. Sometimes at night, when the wind shifts and the air grows cold, he swears he hears the same guttural growls, reminding him the forest does not forget, and it does not forgive. The forest holds its secrets tight, wrapped in shadows and silence. 3 people stepped into its depths alone, each meeting something that refused to be forgotten. Something that doesn't just wait in the dark, but watches and follows long after the sun rises. These stories aren't just tales, they are warnings etched into the quiet, reminders that some places are better left untouched, and some paths better left untraveled. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these forest stories sent a chill down your spine? Was it story 1, story 2, or story 3? Or maybe you have your own experience, a moment alone in the woods where something unseen reached out, a night that never truly ended. Share your story below, and let us know what you think waits in the silent spaces between the trees. If these true accounts of isolation and fear unsettled you, there are more waiting. More places where the darkness lingers and the silence breaks with whispers you'll never forget. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications, because there are countless stories like these, stories that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Remember, the forest never forgets and it never lets go.